Level interconnectedness. The applied engineering of the domination system. All that you do matters. All you do ripples outward and has macro-level effects. Nothing happens in a vacuum, be it in the temporal world, or beyond it in the infinite. The interplay between the various micros and the macros is ever present. The vast cosmic ecosystem is an ecosystem of integrated ecosystems. Being this is the case, why do you suppose so many think they are immune from this great interconnectedness? How is it that so many individuals live their lives as if they are the center of a universe which they alone are the sovereign of, when all things around them and in them testify to the opposite of their perspective? Do we not see this same thing play out in regards to any collective organization of human beings such as corporations and nation-states? If nothing truly happens in a vacuum in this interconnected ecosystem of ecosystems, why do so few people understand this important truth? Therewith then is the crux of the problem. Truth. The futilitude of the slaves of lies. Many people deny the truth for the deceptive convenience of their selfishness and pride. Many more simply have never been taught effectively that their lives are far more important and impactful to the greater whole than they would have ever considered. Why do you suppose this is the case? Could it be the former, and the latter have a much deeper interplay than humanity is willing to admit? Or might it be simply that few people know just how connected everyone really is? Might it have been engineered this way? Aggregated effect is real. The good and bad, the truth and lies, all exist in the same global collective reality, interacting with one another in ripple effects that sweep around the world and feedbacks on the collective. Nothing is insignificant in this world. No word, action or individual is without worth and impact. It all mixes up together. However, like oil and water, it never dissolved into a singular new substance, instead separates to its various constituent parts. Why do you suppose this is? Oppositional oil and water. Molecules of water are strongly attracted to each other, because they are polar. Oil and water molecules are not attracted to each other, because oil molecules are nonpolar and hydrophobic or water-fearing. Oil has a lower density than water, so it always floats on top. Likewise, as the oil and water are oppositional in attraction, repelling one another, so too it is for those who are seeking the truth and those who are comfortable in their lies. The truth repels lies, exposing them in the process of simply being what it is. The lie needs the truth it denies and hates, even as it is terrified of being exposed by it. Thusly the truth-phobic are much like the oil is hydrophobic. The lie sees the truth in adversarial terms, and always tries to subdue it, co-opt it, or destroy its influence. Such as it is in the collective human experience. The corruptive influences exert an impact upon all of humanity and nature. The truth exposes it so in order to remain in power and control, to protect its fragile pride and ego. The lie is always involved in attempting to mix the oil and water in temporary mixtures of confusion. However, the temporary appearance of mixing never lasts, just as the water and oil molecules seek their own kind, and separate to their own concentrations. A lie always tries to divide and conquer. This should be obvious to humanity. As should it be obvious that the agitation of the masses through machinations has a limited intended effect, though with very destructive short-term impacts to humanity. Just as agitating a container filled with water and oil will cause the appearance of mixing to the eye, beyond the appearance is the actual effect. The concentrations of oil and water are simply just dispersed in one another in smaller dispersed concentrations. Likewise, in the sea of peoples and nations, it is why these machinationists, those deceivers in the lie, see it necessary to introduce dispersant ideological and situational additives to the water and oil of society to create a constant agitation of the populace. They do this as a means of deception intended to divide, conquer, and keep the people embroiled in conflict to be more easily conquered through diversionary methods and means. After all, a poisoned, confused, divided and embattled humanity is one easily enslaved and used for selfish gain, while strengthening one's power and control over them. See the art of war here. Being that all things are essentially connected, The collective impact on humanity is one of being deceived and manipulated by lies in order to keep them subdued and enslaved to that which is inherently destructive to their humanity. This is used as a means of forcing compliance to malevolent powers who have malice towards human beings attempting to thwart their liberation by truth which would end the domination system which holds them in chains. All are affected by all for better or for worse. The rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Yes, aggregated effect is real. So is the need for grace, considering we all have existential objective positive and negative impacts on all things in the world. Even if some of us are operating in and from false assumptions, ideologies and perspectives. Now what does that actually mean? Positive to whom or what? Negative to whom or what? On what basis does the human collective determine the baselines for positive and negative definitions? Here wherein is the locality of the conflict zone, whose effects reveal definitive root causality. Here the battle between objective contextual truth and the conflict derived from deconstructed contextual confusion is ongoing. A lie is not the absence of objective truth, but rather is the false contextual usage of truth manifested in confused thought and action. This is the futilitude of induced confusion in pathologic, theologic and philosophic silos intended to corrupt. The entropic futilitude. Corrosion is a natural process, which converts a refined metal to a more chemically stable form, such as its oxide, hydroxide, or sulfide. It is the gradual destruction of materials, usually metals, by chemical and/or electrochemical reaction with their environment. Corrosion engineering is the field dedicated to controlling and stopping corrosion. Using this as a metaphor for truth and lies. What a lie intends on doing by fighting against and decontextualizing objective truth actually has the opposite effect in the end. It proves the truth to be true, and a lie to be a lie which is insufficient to replace the truth. The process of a lie actually is self-destructive to the lie in that it is exposed for being as such, rendering its temporary power transitorily fleeting, and ultimately futile in its end state. This end state is essentially self-negational. Being that the lie denies its dependence upon the very objective truth it seeks to overthrow in subjective pride, it blinds itself to the futility that its endeavors are inextricably chained to. That being that it will never be able to stand up to the truth, and in attempting to do so always yields its exposure as being pathetically insufficient due to its inherent corruption. The futilitude of the post-truth thinker. Those who are the most militantly oppositional to objective truth are often the most militant in enforcing their subjective points of view on others. Thereby they act as ideological sovereigns using authoritarian means and methods to force compliance to their wishes, whose perspectives are absolute and beyond reproach. The absolutist subjectivist denies objective truth that they might play the false sovereign over others, acting as a de facto dictator, which is actually what they accuse anyone who believes in an overarching objective meta-narrative of engaging in. They do this in pride. They deny any absolutes outside of their own desires and beliefs they disagree with or even rebel against, while acting as though their own perspectives are absolutist. Thusly, in doing so, they reveal the utter hypocrisy, an inverted reality which they are enslaved to. The futilitude of the false light of a counterfeit freedom. When these same ones say they are seeking freedom, it is freedom from the constraints of objective truth which is in fact a demand to remain a slave to a lie and enslave others to the very lies they themselves serve. This is no different from the manner with which autocrats rule over their nations with forced complicity to their own false ideological constructs. This is the futilitude meta-inversion. A futilitude is a state of being grounded in pride and self-deception where a futile self-destructive attitude and its outworking ripples affect the collective whole of humanity. The roots of all futilitudes are in pride as well as its derivative selfishness. It is a particularly virulent form of narcissism. The binary simulacrum fuels adversarial polarity like two snakes eating their own tails. It attempts to ensnare, co-opt and then devour truth only to find itself exposed by it. Hence why we say that pride always comes before the fall and the fall always comes with great destructive consequences. Thusly, The irony of the Tao of the autocrat is the same as any other subjectivist individual who, living for and in a lie, leads them to make decisions, which hastens their speed on the broad path towards destruction. All of this exposes their folly and foolishness, proving the truth even as they deny it at their own peril. The futilitude of the zeitgeist is war against spiritus veritatis. The zeitgeist is at war against spiritus veritatis, knowing its exposure is certain yet denying this eventual outcome. Its domain is that of the external appearances, which is in existential meta-darkness. This domain is the temporal construct of the material world, which is in effect in denial of the infinite overarching meta-narrative, which the temporal is locked into. It is called finite for good reason. The temporal is bound to something akin to an encrypted polymorphological quantum entanglement. Its observable micros are seen in negative neuroimprints in the human brain. However, this is but the surface reality of a much deeper ideological, physiological, psychological and metalogical imprisonment. All of it is chained to the temporal construct, which is polymorphologically encrypted from the micros to the macros. It operates as a domination system to maintain power over and force compliance to its corruptive false meta-narrative, which is at war against the authentic objective truth narrative, which is denies even as it is reliant upon it for its very existence. Thusly, the false narrative seeks to stand between humanity at large and the objective infinite truth meta-narrative like a great cloud of polluting smog, in order to deceive, confuse, divide, devour and destroy humanity to further its own service to its pride and hatred towards the truth. The domination system rules by a complex global divide and conquer strategy bent on total control and absolutist power, while being a false light leading humanity towards exponential corruption and eventual destruction. The futilitude of the resulting signals noise in advanced stage cognitive pathology in confirmation bias-full delusions. Language is an interesting thing as it pertains to the manner which people perceive its use, and pour into it their subjective contextual frameworks. In social media, language usage when combined with images as in video and memes, are nearly always linked to preconceived perception bias in creating a confirmation bias distortion loop in which triggers the perceiver, who then projects their triggered emotive response upon the source of the social media post, thereby exposing themselves and their bias. This most results in personal attacks, or some snarky attempt to cast aspersions upon the same source as an attempt by the perceiver to transfer and displace their own insufficiencies upon them. The personal attack is a merely sign of the perceiver's insecurities and biases, which bypasses their rational brain, preventing rational and respectful discourse. In short, it reveals their pride and blind spots even as their unfounded accusations reveal their intent by stripping them of their self-perceived coveredness. Prolonged social media use reinforces these trigger mechanisms in the brain, much like an abusive relationship reinforces fight-or-flight defense mechanisms. Now the complexities of all human beings as well as each individual's collective experiences, both real and imagined, combine with their knowledge base, and these reinforcing external influencers to feed the confirmation bias feedback loops in increasing dissonance and distortions of the person's perceptions. That echoes back in a return phase in triggered responses modalities. Once this occurs and the individual projects their triggered response upon another, the brain expects a response which will conform to their preconceived expectation of the targeted individual's response in line with their self-referential confirmation biases which created the conflict to begin with in their original projections. This is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy cycle. In advanced state pathologies, such people will invent the expected triggered response from their target without regard to that targeted individual's actual response. This we call yet another confirmation bias reinforcement cycle, which imprints more false memories and distortions of perceived events. The effects of weaponized information and propaganda within the framework of micro-targeting of individuals within subdemographic categories fuels the aforementioned pathological cycling in the individual, increasing the accelerated entropic effects upon the cognitive functioning of said individual while blinding them to the increasing seriousness of their predicament, much in the same way a serious addiction moves exponentially towards that mortal terminus of zero tolerance, causing an overdose. The entire pathological process as such moves from neurosis to psychosis into a termination phase for the individual's original personality, conforming them into a beast-like creature controlled completely by their cognitive illness, which has in a very real sense reprogrammed their perceptions, and subsequent and nearly absolute involuntary behaviors broken off from reality and any form of normative self-discipline and rational restraint. They are quite literally brainwashed, becoming a proxy for the cognitive illness which has conformed them into nearly constant delusion, terminating their personality. Individuals who are approaching terminal state cognitive pathology live in a synthetic world in which their cognitive break has locked them into with complex denial mechanisms coupled with hyper-simplified extreme emotive and behavioral interactions with others, and the actual real world at large. In short, such individuals are so owned by their delusions that they become quite literally in their one mind absolute sovereigns in all their ways, and all of their interactions with others completely devoid of any rational thought to their predicament. They march to their destruction in nearly constant dopamine surges, blissfully believing the rightness of their wrongness in perceptions and actions. There are many examples of this level of self-destructive delusion throughout history, from Caligula to the Nazi leadership at Nuremberg. In each case they projected their own delusions upon everyone else, right up their own demise in a sickening state of euphoria at their own destruction. Such are your times and what you are living in. I have no doubt some will try to apply this wrongly to one side or the other absolutely, while never seeing they are actually exposing themselves and exampling this I have written to you, exposing themselves. Always remember you are responsible personally for how you take what I offer here and use it. And I will hold you accountable if you use it wrongly. I always know when it is being used out of its intended context. As it is for people, so too it is for nations. Max Davis, Othel, Strategic Advanced Intelligence.